So you've kind of walked us up to that moment of meeting Daryl and starting the Total Soccer Show in Richmond. And this isn't about me. I do remember those days a little bit because it was the beginning of my thing as well. What did you think was going to happen? Like really, what was your not your this is small and we're just doing a thing, we're having fun, but like what was your dream for what that might be when you started?
Yeah. I have used this analogy before. It never lands. I'm going to use it anyway again. I absolutely had the like Simpsons Family Guy expectation for this. And the premise of like every Simpsons episode for a long while, I haven't seen Simpsons in forever, but all of those shows are always like, Homer starts a website and then the entire town is reading the website.
Yes.
Peter starts a radio show. The entire town is listening to his radio show immediately.
Of course.
And I definitely thought like, oh yeah, we're working all these late hours. I was doing a full-time office job, 40 hours a week, and would then go in.
What was it? I think it's important. What was it? What were you doing?
Environmental consulting.
So what were your actual job?
Stormwater management.
Okay.
And basically
it's important.
Treatment, mitigation, all that good stuff. I still remain very interested.
I just want to take us back to a time when Taylor Rockwell was working 40 hours a week in an office, and then you're busting your ass at night to do Total Soccer Show.
Exactly, man. That was the thing, is like, so especially when we went to 2 days a week, that was usually leaving work, getting food, going to the studio, recording until 2:00 in the morning, going home, waking up, going into the work at 8 a.m. The things you can do when you're in your early mid-20s. And kept doing that for multiple years until eventually my then girlfriend, now wife, and I moved to Turkey together. And I think I entertained ideas of keeping the show going and like being on it, but I wasn't for 2 years. Daryl had a kind of rotating crew in there. But I'll pause there to say, to answer your question, I definitely thought that it was going to be, we have 500 listeners now, and then it's going to be 1,000, and then 2,000, and then suddenly the whole world will be listening.
I'm glad you're saying
Not quite that time.
Because I think there's this instinct to play down everything about whatever journey we're on. Like it's a humility thing that's drilled into us. I don't know where it comes from necessarily. I mean, I know military background for me, my father, not me, but I'm sure that's part of the culture. And you were like, no, I think we're going to be huge. You believed in your ability. I mean, what was it? Did you think you had something special? I mean, did you feel that at the time, or was it just like this doesn't exist and we're making it, and that's why it's going to be big?
Just white guy arrogance. I mean, that was a big part of it. Is I think I thought I was supremely clever and very like I was a voice that needed to be heard. Like I was my mom bought me Bill Simmons' book Now I Can Die in Peace when I was in college, and that was
I've read it.
A thing that like that was my introduction to him, and that was when I think he was still, to me at least, pretty revolutionary in bringing in the pop culture and bringing in references that made the sport more accessible, but also bringing in that personal touch. If we want to go super into the weeds, the person I have always been sort of obsessed with since like high school, but at the same time would never ever want to meet. I feel that way about Johan Cruyff, and I feel that way about Hunter S. Thompson. I was super into Hunter S. Thompson and read. I won't claim to have read all of his books because I've tried a few, and some of them are very specific to like 1970s political culture. But Hell's Angels is a great book. When he was sort of embedded with the Hell's Angels, he ended up getting like curb stomped, and that was how that ended for him. But Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas and everything. But The Kentucky Derby is Decadent and Depraved is an article that I read from his that's basically him on a drugs and alcohol binge for like 72 hours while theoretically covering the Kentucky Derby. And it's all part of gonzo journalism and putting yourself in the story. And that was always really interesting to me about being a storyteller for sports, that you can involve yourself in these different stories and these different moments and help provide context and explanation without LSD and heroin.
So look, I certainly had a phase where I was very influenced by Bill Simmons as well. I remember reading his 4,000 word NBA columns and not caring about the NBA, right? That it was kind of like,
oh yeah, same here, dude. Same here for sure.
And printing out every, was it page 2 of ESPN?
Yep. All his mailbags and stuff. Yeah.
Printing out all the mailbags. What he did, I think
I killed a lot of time at the office doing that.
Oh, absolutely. You and I stole some hours, but it was that he wasn't pretending to be unbiased. He wasn't pretending to be a
Yeah.
neutral. Right? He wasn't messing around with this idea of like, oh, I'm just here covering this. It was like, and it's not. It is revolutionary, but when you think back to that actual like, what did he do? All he did was write like a fan in a way that was fun. Like that's all he did. And yeah, I can see how that could be an influence.
Yeah, I mean, and I think so. I was sure, he had kind of done it himself. He started his like sports guy website, or BS Sports Guy, I think
Boston
it
sports
was, or
guy.
Boston
Yeah.
Sports Guy. There it is. And then that, I think Jimmy Kimmel started reading that, and that was sort of the launch pad for him. And so I was sure that somebody was going to discover us, and like that was how it was going to go. And I remember being very nervous when I listened to a podcast with him and Chuck Klosterman when they were starting Grantland, before they started Grantland. And they were talking about all the different sports they were going to cover. And I was like, we could be their soccer podcast. And in that episode, as I was thinking that, they said like, yeah, we're talking to these two buddies of mine. They're so good. Roger and Michael, we're going to get them to do a soccer podcast for us. And right there, I was like, oh no. And that was obviously Men in Blazers.
Yeah.
But so like, I think I thought about that a lot, about how to be able to cover sports and be involved in sports and be able to write or talk about soccer for a living. That I listened to sports radio on the way to work, and I would watch tons of sports. I've never been the like obsessive sports fan. I think a lot of that has to do with growing up in Richmond, where there's not a major team. So I've never had that growing up where the whole city stops so the Chiefs can play, or everybody's watching the Sixers or whatever it might be. That's a good one for basketball. I have no idea.
They're good. Don't worry.
Like I think that's always appealed to me, but that was never really a thing I grew up with.
Do
My
you
dad
think
wasn't
so?
really.
So let me come.
big into
Well, I
sports.
want to get to your dad, but you played as a kid. You loved soccer. You play soccer. Were you aware of the outer world, the outside world beyond your team, beyond your playing? And obviously, I know you're a United fan, but when did that start? Because I'm wondering if being in Richmond and not sort of having that the local team that captured everybody's attention, that had the whole city enraptured, whether that pushed you to maybe be a little bit more expansive with your sports experience.
I think it was probably the coaches I had would
Okay.
be the thing that made me interested in it. So one of my first coaches at Travel was a guy named John Lalay, who has since passed away. He was from Jersey, the island in the Channel, I believe.
Oh, that's
which was
right,
always his
yeah.
trivia question when you had the internet.
Uh-huh.
Very different when you didn't have the internet. Rather, very difficult to figure out where Jersey is or what that is. But he was an English guy who was just very sweet and he's like the definitive good English coach that was very kind of sarcastic and biting, but in a I'm going to make you a better player sort of way. And then I've talked about this at length. Joe always teases me because Derek Etienne Jr.'s dad was a like occasional coach for me, but his uncle Daryl was my coach for I think 3 years or 4 years. And he taught me a lot about the dark arts of soccer, a lot of untying shoelaces before corners, but also was just like a cool young coach. And I think for so much of my life, it was suburban dads
Yeah.
and then like British coaches or, American college bros. And to have like a young Haitian guy who was just like fun and listened to rap. I listened to rap. My parents did not like that. It was a person who I felt like I connected with, and I had another coach, but those two played for the Kickers, as did another coach named Josh McKay, and he was the one who really was like, "Here's how you clean your shoes. Here's how you should be watching soccer." He was a very like life lessons sort of guy, and
Okay.
and I think all of that taught me that there's just a lot more going on, and that like
So
like you're supposed to look out for your teammates and make sure they're doing okay. That was another big one that I didn't really fully realize.
So you did there wasn't an NFL team or an NBA team in Richmond, but you had a professional soccer team at a time when that was completely uncommon. I mean, outside of MLS cities, and I think you're young enough or old enough rather that MLS probably wasn't around when you're talking about.
No, it wasn't.
Yeah,
that's why the Kickers won the league in '95. That's when they won the U.S. Open Cup as well. And they had like Richie Williams was one of the central midfielders for them. They had a ton of guys who would end up going on to Major League Soccer, but they were really good. And I think having a very good local team probably kept that interest alive. I don't think I ever entertained the possibility of becoming a professional. That was sort of always my drawback as a player. I had had a stoned realization once when I was later in life that I would sort of assign myself a role and then live within that role. So if I would play for a team and I just decided I wasn't the best player, then I would play like I wasn't the best player. If I decided I was the best player, then I would play better. It was a weird mental construct
But
that still exists
that's
for
it.
sure.
That's interesting though, because you're saying that as a player, this was your mentality, but then you get to the point of, and maybe it's just the naivete of being in your 20s and having all that energy to burn. And obviously I think that it was intoxicating to kind of be around what was happening in the internet, 07, 08, 09, when all these things were getting off the ground. You were on the complete opposite end of the spectrum with your soccer show. We're going to be huge. What are you talking about?
Yeah, delusions of grandeur is a thing that comes to mind for me. Yeah, I mean, I think I always wanted to yeah, probably be famous, to be known, to have that level of
Do
influence.
you feel
And
famous?
no, and I don't want that anymore. Like I don't care anymore. That faded probably when I moved, like in 2016 when we took the show full time. As counterintuitive as that sounds, like Daryl and I recorded. Daryl lived in Richmond. I was abroad. Then I was in DC, and we would do the show remotely. Then I moved back to Richmond, and we had an office downtown. And until when was the coaching convention? It would have been in
Yeah.
Philly. It would have been after the failure to qualify. So what, like 2018, I guess,
It
like
would have been
January 2018.
January 2018. Right.
That was the first time that he and I, like, we had gotten press credentials, we had gone to games, but that was the first time we went to like a multi-day event around the soccer community. And that one happened to be the United Soccer Coaches Convention. It was also the men's draft when that was still a thing. I believe the women's draft, and then also U.S. soccer presidential election was happening. So then you had all the candidates there, and it kind of like created a false impression that this thing happened once a year, that they were just every like luminary figure in the soccer world was showing up in one city.
Yeah.
It still happens to some extent, but not
I had
like
been
that.
to those. That one was definitely different. There was a truck
Right?
outside, like
Yeah, that's right.
with a message about, I can't remember who it was about, but that was an insane year. Yeah. So that was you guys coming sort of out of the cave a little bit.
Yeah.
Right?
And so to have people be like, oh yeah, I listen, like, oh yeah, I love your show. And that was still very, like, we did a live show with George from Howler at a bar, and that got a good turnout. I think mostly because like Alexi and Tab Ramos were there.
I was
I'll
there.
give credit where credit
I
is
was there.
due.
I didn't get pulled up on stage. I was very disappointed.
Blame George. That's
well,
actually, and that's where we met the Cooligans as well.
That's
Yeah, small world. But that was the first time that we sort of realized like people were actually listening. And to be honest, it still blows my mind. We did the live shows in New York this past summer, and still meeting people who like, I've listened since 2016. I just started listening. I'm equally fascinated by both of those people. And so, no, it just became a thing where it was for the longest time just me and my best friend in an office talking about soccer. And I think that's what made the show so good, was that usually by the time we recorded an episode, we had already had that conversation at least once, if not twice. Not scripted, not rehearsed, but just things that we had talked about during the game. Like, is this happening? And we would be paying really good attention. And so then Daryl was always really good about kind of bringing that stuff back up. And it just became us having kind of friendship conversations about soccer and tactics, but other stuff peppered in there too. And that seemed to resonate. And I think that's really important for me, because it taught me that people want to hear your authentic thoughts, even if your thoughts are like, I don't understand why this is happening. It doesn't make any sense. Or I don't like this, even if everybody else does. I think when you're being sort of true in what you're saying, because it's what you believe, to some extent, you can't be wrong, because you're advocating what is your true position. But then simultaneously, I think there has to be an acceptance that you could be wrong. And so having that approach, I think, was more important to me in developing that relationship. And yeah, since then I've never really wanted to like, we always got that question about like, what's next? What's the next thing? How are you guys going to keep evolving? And I was like, I hope I don't really want to. I really enjoy just talking about soccer. I don't want to have to show up at 5 a.m. to do TV or make sure I have a standing appointment with my barber so I look good on mic. I'm recording this right now from my guest room with like a cardboard box as sound buffering.
Unfortunately, people will see this eventually, but that's okay. It's you're doing the work. So let me. Okay, a couple of different things I want to talk about off of that, but I'll talk about Daryl. Let's talk about Daryl, not me, you. And I know what I know of Daryl and my interactions with him is he wouldn't want this to be a sad discussion about Daryl and about his passing, but clearly that's a factor in your journey. That's a thing that happened, and I'm wondering if you can put yourself back to that moment when you found out that he was sick, when he went down to Florida and things started happening. And then, knowing him and how thoughtful a person he was, I imagine there was a lot of discussion about what happens as you move forward and as you get closer to that inevitable moment, unfortunately.
Um, I'll take that in like two parts. So I think about it, if this makes sense, like I think about driving down the highway and seeing somebody get a flat tire, and thinking about like this morning, like I haven't had coffee, I didn't sleep well, like I'm hungover, whatever it may be, and seeing that person with a flat tire and just thinking like if that happened right now, I don't know what I would do. But the answer is like you would pull over and change your tire. It's just it would be a pain in the butt because you're thinking about it. And I think like I say that because it's the best way I can explain getting that news from Daryl of you ask that now, I don't know what I would do. I don't know how I would process it. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I think I would be much more scared than I was at that point. But it was I had never experienced anything like that. Not just like I had family members have cancer, um, but never a close friend who was young have something like that happen and then have it be just in every single update was basically worse.
Yeah.
That he had a genetic marker that made him predisposed to aggressive cancer, that it had already spread, I believe, by the time he was able to sort of get it looked at fully. So very quickly, I can't even remember if he did chemo or maybe he only did a few rounds. And then it was just sort of like, yeah, this isn't going to work. And he had to get into trials. Um, and so it was really, really scary. I will say I am eternally grateful that he was down in Florida when he finally went to the hospital. And George Qureshi, the aforementioned, was there and I think loaned them his car so that like they could, Shannon, Daryl's
Wow.
wife, could get to and from the hospital. And George kind of checked in all the time. I think they ended up staying with George a couple days. So it was really comforting to have a friend there who I think could kind of help. And I felt a little bit less helpless. But I didn't really get it. Like to be totally honest, like at times that there were moments like Daryl continued to play soccer when he got a little bit stronger and a little bit healthier, and he because I saw him every day, I didn't see the deterioration the way
Yeah.
other people did,
Mm-hmm.
and so for me, it was Daryl looks the same as he did. Yeah, he's skinnier, and then we would go to events and I would see people see him, and it was that sort of like, oh,
Yeah.
this is worse than I'm realizing. And that was really hard because I don't think I know he didn't like talking about it. I
Yeah.
know he didn't like people treating him differently. He didn't want to be treated differently. And so to be totally honest, like no, we didn't really talk about it. And like
Okay.
a lot of the way things played out was because he had to go up to Boston to do this experimental therapy and treatment, and that was every other week. So he's getting this treatment. He's going up to Boston. He's coming back. He doesn't really have time to do stuff. When he was getting chemo for that brief period, I believe he was really weak. And so he couldn't watch games. So he felt like he couldn't do weekend review with the level of sincerity or thoroughness that he wanted. And that's how Ryan came on board. And then I think I kind of felt like we needed one more person. And I had talked to Graham about La Liga. He was sort of our La Liga expert. And so he started doing the show. And Joe was just like a very logical person to come in and talk US and MLS. And he was already doing MLS assist at the time. So it all sort of organically happened.
Okay.
But like, I may have said this before, but like the week before he went into hospice, he was saying like, "All right, I'll be back next week." Like I think he
Yeah.
always felt like as long as I don't. This is me editorializing, so grain of salt. But my feeling was that he sort of felt like if I don't ever think it's going to happen, then I can kind of keep fighting it and I can keep moving forward.
Yeah.
And so I think he really just kind of kept trying to live the life he could to the extent he could. And so it wasn't a surprise necessarily when he passed, but it was that same level of sort of stunned shock. It was in the middle of a 2016 presidential debate, which was just such a fun time.
2020.
Uh,
2020.
and I remember when I think that was it. Maybe it was 20. Oh no, it was obviously 2020 presidential debates is when that happened.
Yes.
2016 because I remember
Right.
we had a bottle of champagne set aside for when Donald Trump was no longer president. But yeah, I think I got a text from his wife in the middle of a debate that he had passed, and still just being like, but that's not what was supposed to happen. Like it never felt real. Sometimes it still doesn't.
Yeah.
But it was definitely not a thing that I think we really had talked out fully.
Okay. All
And
right.
so I'm
Well,
really grateful that I got to see him when he was in hospice treatment. And even then, I think it wasn't, it was to say goodbye, not to have
yeah.
a conversation or anything like that. which was tough, but still to get to work with your best friend in that level of proximity for that long. And we had our fights here and there, usually very stupid, usually after a lack of sleep, usually over something like, is St. Vincent and the Grenadines actually that much worse than Trinidad and Tobago? That led to the most like stupid, lengthy, petulant argument I think we had. But I mean, that aside, I spent more time with him than I did my wife for huge chunks of time, and I think that's something that I'm just eternally grateful for, that I
Yeah.
had a person in my life who could have such an impact.
Obviously, his passing, resounded across soccer. I mean, even Wolves honoring him after his passing, which was obviously incredible. It sort of speaks to, you're saying you don't want to be famous, you don't want to be going to do TV at 5 a.m, that kind of thing. You don't think about that next level, but clearly that indicated, beyond the live events and everything, it indicated the reach of the show. And I'm just kind of curious, where do you see yourself? I mean, maybe you could take this in two parts, sort of the original version of the Total Soccer Show, or the Daryl Taylor version, and then the
Mm-hmm.
now version. Where do you kind of see yourself in the
Yeah.
soccer world, if you
It's
have
an
those
no,
thoughts?
it's an interesting question. And I'm not sure this is the answer to the actual question, but I will say this. Like, so he passed away, and when we had been planning, so he passed away late November, or no, excuse me, late October. My daughter was born December 1st, and his birthday was November. That's the confusion there. And we had a plan that I was going to take a month of paternity, and he would run the show. And so when that obviously wasn't going to be the case, there was a bit of panic for me in trying to make sure that the show continued. It's a business. We have people that we pay. I wanted to make sure that it didn't just sort of collapse. And so credit to Joe and Ryan for stepping in, but I never really took time off, and I think I took 2 weeks for paternity when Reverie was born, and then went right back to it. And we don't take lengthy vacations. We'll maybe take a week off here and there. It's not really, I don't know, I just not really a thing for me. um, Maybe that's like, I don't know, brainwashed into me from a young age. Who knows? But so I say all that to say that only in the past few months did it occur to me that like I wasn't, like, I was doing it because I wanted the show to continue and not because like I really enjoyed it. And I think it was sort of a necessary slowdown in thought of like, why am I still doing this?
Uh-huh.
Would I rather just, be a stay-at-home dad? Would I rather go do something else? And the answer to that is no. I wouldn't rather do that.
Well,
Maybe down the road that will change.
is that
But
just the scales at that point, or do you honestly enjoy what you do?
I think because I was probably doing too much and burning the candle at both ends, there was never time to really slow down and have that same level of authentic viewing and really taking my time to enjoy a game or to try to understand what had happened. And I think there's always a feeling of, I've got 3 hours to watch 3 games, and then I got to be able to record tomorrow, or I got to do my research for lister questions, and it's 2 o'clock in the morning. I got to get this stuff done. And I think learning to have a better schedule, learning to kind of ask for help when I need it, learning to say, you know what, guys, I had to do this like last week or 2 weeks ago. I got either food poisoning or a 24-hour bug, courtesy of my daughter being in preschool. But I like recovered in time, but hadn't done enough work. And I think a couple months before that, I would have just pushed through and like done what I could, but I don't know if I would have contributed much. And maybe there's a level of ego there. And instead, just saying like, guys, I haven't done the research. Are you guys okay without me? And they were, because they work very hard and they're all very good at what they do. And I think sort of accepting those limitations has allowed me to slow down. And like I was saying this on the show today when we recorded this, I don't know when this will air, but April 17th is when we're recording. Like, I watched the Chelsea Brighton game, and I spent like 20 minutes watching one like 45-second long sequence. Like that, it was fascinating to me what Brighton did, how they played out of pressure. And that is not a thing I would have done for a while, but used to be my favorite thing of like, how does this happen? How does this guy know to go? Oh, he knows how to go because this guy has triggered that and he's told him. Like, just learning those things, that's the stuff that will pull me in. And so that's, I think, like one way that I've come to kind of re-embrace doing the show. And then the other thing is just I've always liked the history and the anthropological side. Those were my
Mm-hmm.
majors. And so I think anything that allows me to explore more in depth what a team is doing or why they're doing it or how a player works or, you know, like that I think is also a thing that I think I kind of put on the back burner for a long time. And we're starting to bring back in more with the big thing and listener questions. And so I think kind of rediscovering the stuff that made me want to do the show in the first place has brought me back to really enjoying doing it. And between Patreon and the big thing and Soccer 101, I think I do 9 episodes a week now, which is
It's a
maybe too
lot,
much. Maybe
Taylor.
people are tired of my voice, but
No.
it's a lot, but so far so good.
Okay, I was going to ask you just sort of a very, it's a little bit cliche question. If you weren't doing this, what would you be doing? But I also kind of want to go back with the limited time we have left and ask you about your upbringing beyond your introduction to soccer and sort of like where you come from, because you and I have had some discussions about that, and I'm just curious. You want to share any? Because you mentioned Champagne when Donald Trump was no longer president. I mean, a lot of people felt that way, regardless of their politics. But I do think that your political outlook is part of who you are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that. I think increasingly so in the last few years. Like I don't know how much that had to define sports, but definitely I think Donald Trump brought that front and center because it just felt like, I mean, I will never forget that he gets elected and then the USA plays Mexico in a World Cup qualifier like a week later.
Yeah.
And it just felt like what was already a sort of very anxiety inducing game has this new level of anxiety and frustration to it.
I don't know if this is you, and this is about you and not me, but it made me feel like I couldn't support my team as much as I wanted to. Like I felt ashamed about my team.
Yeah. I think certainly it made me feel less like we were the good guys going into that game. And I still maybe this will annoy people. I'm sure at least some people will be. But I still struggle with that. Like we found out in, I think 2015 that you can write to your senator, and if you send them a letter requesting it in $10, they are obligated to send you an American flag. And then I think for $20 they'll send you one that was flown over the Capitol. So we did that. We were like, sweet, we want an American flag. There was this idea, I think at the time for me, that the only people who have American flags are right wingers, and it shouldn't be that way. We have one. I don't fly it. I don't fly the Richmond City flag because I don't like the Richmond City government. Right now, I don't like the Virginia government. The only flag I think I would feel comfortable flying these days is a Richmond Kickers flag. That's sort of where things are for me. So I still have that level of, I don't know if how much the government truly represents me, but I know that the people who justifiably protest and have outrage towards the government, I do feel like they speak volumes and they resonate with me. And so that's the other thing that I hope that we sort of bring to the show. But I think politics is always a thing that if you try to avoid completely, you're going to end up doing the Simmons thing of talking about the Celtics and they're the best team in the world without truly acknowledging it. So I think acknowledging the bias, acknowledging the surrounding sentiment is always important. But I know people aren't listening to me for my hot political takes.
So that's true, but you're not necessarily putting it in a box for the hour or whatever you're recording, right? It's just kind of not necessarily pertinent to the discussion. And I'm curious. I mean, I battle this too. It's like how much of me, real me, personal me, should come out through a microphone. And I don't know. Do your listeners know you beyond smart soccer guy Taylor Rockwell?
It's a good question. My honest answer is I don't know if they do, but I think a lot of that is genuinely because I'm not sure they want to.
You're making a conscious choice. I mean, you would have to go out of your way to share something personal, right? There would have to be some sort of conceit for you to tell the story of why your politics are the way they are, whatever it is, whatever the topic in your mind might be. But I
just don't think that's why people listen. I think if people wanted me to talk about my politics, if people were interested in that, I mean, I'm doing it now. I don't care. Who I am on the show is who I am. That has always been, I think, a key thing for both me and for Daryl. That we were never playing characters. We were never advocating positions we didn't believe in. What we say is what we believe, and I think that's the most important thing to me about doing the show is as soon as you are saying something you don't really mean, but we need the counterpoint, you can say okay, I'll provide a logical counterpoint here. It's not something I believe in, but here would be the argument. Like, I think that's fair, but like, there's no disconnect as far as I'm concerned between me recording and then me turning off. I guess I curse more. That would be one. I think people are surprised that I curse as much as I do because TSS is clean. But that aside, like, it's pretty much the same. It's just more so.
I feel like
the same thing is like being like, you asked me, am I famous? I would say no.
Yeah.
I would say, do people want to hear like my takes on that stuff? I would say no. I don't think people come to hear me talk about lots of things, maybe TV, maybe stuff that I like feel like I know about, I'll talk about, but I don't know. For the most part, people don't want to hear what I have to say.
Again, I left this for the tail end of our discussion, so we can't really go too deep in it. But the Iron Front flag gets this the center of attention for a couple of weeks in MLS because some fans are flying it in Seattle and Portland and the like, and the league is trying to squash freedom of expression, whatever. I mean, is that something you would talk about and make it clear where you fall on?
Oh yeah, we did. We did. Because and I think there are a couple reasons for that. First of all, I from what I was, anti-fascism, anti-monarchy, I forget what the third anti is of the Iron Front, the 3 lines, but those all resonated. I think the other thing, and this doesn't really answer your question, but it's part of the answer, is just that I talked to people from Portland, and their point was, it's not about the flag. It's not even about the politics behind it or anything about that. It's just that Portland is a counterculture city. It was founded, or not founded, but it has become, the identity is that, like, we stand against things that we don't agree with. We will stand up for things, and it creates this very unique world that is Portland. And Major League Soccer for so long benefited from that and utilized that in their marketing and in their images and everything else. And then when there's a moment when that identity clashes with the league, and the league is then like, well, no, that's not allowed anymore.
Clashes with the feeling
of like, so you guys only want us when we do good stuff for you. And I think that really hit home, that you are basically telling an entire city that identifies a certain way, no, we don't want that. Be the city we want you to be for marketing purposes. And that really bothered me. So no, I think we'll talk about stuff when we talked about some of like the election and what that meant to us when that US game happened. I think we talked about, like we had Bobasi on to talk about George Floyd, and that really, or I did, I guess. I think that was after, or no, Daryl was here for the protests. I think that was him being intermittently able to be on the show. But I think we always want to bring in the things that appeal to us and that we feel like we can add something of substance to. There's also plenty of things, the Van Zier stuff recently with the Red Bulls, I don't feel like I have anything to add to that. And I think it's worth, like we mentioned it on the show, we talked about it, but I am not a person of color. I am not a person who's going to be hurt by slurs. And so for me to then talk about how horrifically inappropriate it is true, but at the same time, there are better, smarter people out there who can better explain what that is and why it's hurtful and how it makes them feel disconnected from this league or from their team or from the sport they love. And so I think there's a line between trying to be informative and being authentic and performing a thing because it's what is like in fashion. And the idea of Black Lives Matter being a fashionable thing is a thing that I remain very nervous about, because we talked about, I talked to Bobasi, it was a thing that was front and center, and I really want to make sure that I'm honoring that still, even though that movement like is no longer, protests in the streets every single day. And I don't think I do as good of a job as I could, and it's something I'd like to kind of examine as we go. But I think that's sort of the line for me, is can I authentically provide something to the discourse, or am I just kind of jumping in because then I'm a good social media personality?
Yeah, I agree with all of those things, just in terms of having to think about this stuff. I've taken up an hour of your precious recording time of the Total Soccer Show. 9 episodes a week, man. Like that's I mean, I do 5 3-hour shows a week, so I can't really. Never mind. It's all good. Taylor Rockwell, thank you very much, man. It's last question here. I'll give you a minute.
Yeah, we didn't even get into my dad. That's a whole.
No, I ran out of time. I kind of set you up, and then you zigged when I was zagging. It's fine.
Oh, I mean, he's an Army major, retired Army major. judge who has a portrait of Robbie Lee on his wall. So that tells you some things.
That's a little of the unpacking I wanted to get to, because I think you and I are similar.
We don't really
in the
talk
sense,
politics anymore, other than for me to talk about how much I dislike Ronald Reagan, his favorite president of all time.
Yeah, and again, I think we are we're running parallel paths on those, and that's fine. This picture, the one that's up, that people will see with little Revy on top of Taylor's shoulders. I'm assuming that your wife took this picture.
She did.
Okay, yeah. So last thing, I guess, 20 years from now, 15 years from now, before Revy maybe goes off and starts her life, are you going to be taking her to Kickers games? Is that going to be the family outing at that point?
As long as she wants to. I think my hope is right now, as naive as this may sound, and I've told this to people who have kids who are older than me, and they will just sort of stare at me or maybe roll their eyes. I would like to be a parent who, if she has a reason for why she wants to do something and she can explain her process, more power to her. So if she says, you know what, I don't really want the time commitment of going to a Kickers game. I've got my homework done. I want to go hang out with my friends. That seems really fun to me. I might be like, well, they could come. But I mean, I think I want her to be, I want to be in her life. I want her to be in my life, but I don't want to sort of dictate what that looks like. I want her to be her own person, and I want to help shape that person as much as I can. Oh boy, I'm getting emotional. But I also don't want it to be like, be this person or I will be upset with you, which is maybe something I feel like I had in my life. I want her to be able to kind of develop her own personality, her own beliefs. And so I hope that she likes soccer and wants to watch it and loves it because daddy loves it. And that to me is the other aspect of that photo, to go a little bit longer. It's just that she's really happy, and she's happy because we're going to a fun outing where she'll get ice cream and she gets to run around, but also because she's with her mom and her dad, and she's riding on her dad's shoulders, and her dad makes her happy. And Kickaroo jumped the wall where we were today, for the game. So we were down on the right along the wall, so you can have a good view. Kickaroo, the giant mascot, jumped the wall, and she was very terrified and immediately scrambled into my arms. And rather than, just be like, oh yeah, there he is. I'm not a mascot guy. That was never, I was sort of like, oh, this is kind of a weird thing, but I didn't want her to be scared of that. And so I was like, no, it's fine. And he came over and gave her a high five, and she ended up jumping up on top of him, and then Kickaroo held her up. And I love the idea that her dad can be a person that gives her strength and confidence and is there whenever she needs him to be a source of comfort. Okay. So that is also what that photo is.
Well, what if she becomes a Liverpool fan? Then what happens?
Well, then she's done.
Taylor, thank you very much, man. Great stuff. Thank you so much.